So I'm having an existential crisis because I realize that I don't really have opinions on any movies. It's just whatever makes me sound the smartest. And I'm like, wow, that like really sucks. But then again, I don't really like movies, so whatever. Anyways, the Nameless Narcissist here, once again. A simple man diagnosed with NPD, trying to dispel some stigma, and to educate you a little bit on the inner workings of my mind. Keep in mind, I'm no clinician. I can only speak to my own experiences and to the studies that I read, so keep that in mind. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, whatever. And yeah, hope you enjoy the video. So, what do experts not know about NPD? And I will abridge this by saying what most people don't know about NPD, which is how to diagnose it. And before you click off being like, oh my god, this is just being a grandiose asshole, let me explain. So I was watching Kurt Honda, who is a clinical psychologist, I think, out of the Seattle area. And he made a really good series on NPD, at least the parts of it that I watched. I watched like the first 2 episodes in their full and kind of skimmed through the rest of them just because I was like, yeah, whatever. But because somebody recommended it on my channel, I think it was Frederick Nietzsche. Not the real one, but some guy whose YouTube name is Frederick Nietzsche. It's funny. Anyways, so as I'm watching this, he talks about some things that are like super important and why there's so much misinformation about NPD on the internet and just in popular conceptions. And it's because people have a really hard time identifying it. Even clinicians. He cited a study that I wish he would have linked, but I'll link his video so that, like, you know, I'm not completely talking my ass. That 50% of people with NPD are misdiagnosed with most of the time with bipolar or major depressive disorder, which is insane. 50% of people with NPD get an inaccurate telling of what's going on in their head. That's kind of nuts. But all these people have all this conviction over how they're diagnosing people and how they're identifying these traits when it's such a nuanced and very complicated thing to be able to understand and hone in on, especially since so much research just isn't there. Our understandings of these conditions just is not so regimented like it is with like some natural sciences and stuff. Like there's kind of this assumption with people that like, oh, like science knows things, and psychology is being thought of more of a science nowadays, and they just kind of trust like clinicians and everything. It's like, no, they don't know. They know about as much. Well, okay, there are people out there that know more than us, obviously, but like this pedestal of them, they're always right. They always know what they're talking about. I was misdiagnosed with bipolar when once, and before I got my actual diagnosis. And who's to say? Maybe I don't even have NPD. Maybe I just have bipolar, right? Who's to really say? Because these things are so salient. You can't really identify. There's like the lines where one thing ends and another begins is not nearly as clear cut as like the diagnostic and statistical manual would have you believe. Now, on top of this, though, something he also mentioned by a study done by, I think he said, Furman colleagues in 2011, is how poorly people can identify, just laymen can identify personality disorders. So basically they got some case studies together and they were like, gave them like all the diagnostic criteria for the personality disorders, and they were like, all right, which one of these you guys do you think fits this guy the most? And people in general had a very hard time identifying personality disorders because they're complicated. How would that be easy for somebody who has no idea what this is about? But interestingly enough, the lowest was narcissistic personality disorder. Only 4% of people were able to correctly identify which one was NPD, which is pretty nuts. And it makes you think about all these people who are talking about NPD on the internet and shit like that, who have no qualifications. And to think that like 96% of them, I mean, it's probably probably not that one-to-one in terms of the general population, people writing about it, but it gives an idea of how little people know about it. I mean, we are pathologically known for hiding the self, so like it kind of makes sense how people would literally have no idea what this disorder looks like in reality, when what you're looking for is, because it's like you have some of these things that make up NPD, but the way that it presents in people is different for every person with NPD. There's as many presentations of NPD as there are people with NPD. I mean, take grandiosity, for example. You think of grandiosity and you're thinking like some dude who's like, I don't know what normal people think of but like somebody who's very blatantly arrogant, right? But people who are like smart with NPD, that was fucking a little hierarchical, but they know that being overtly arrogant is going to make them be seen, less good by others. And you can't really get your self-esteem juice if you're being grandiose and arrogant overtly all the time, right? So a lot of these guys learn how to hide that. Or like people, or you talk about entitlement. The examples I see on the internet is like, oh, they'll go to the front of the line in a store because they think they're above that. I was like, that's rude as shit. Why would anybody do that? Wherein entitlement to me is more so like, I am entitled to like specific degrees of loyalty from the people in my life and shit like that, like to a ridiculous degree. Entitlement's probably one of the things I see the least, honestly, in my symptomology. But still, and for all these people to be like, oh, we know exactly what NPD is, 100%, like whatever, and this also like, this hinders my ability to help people too. Because let's say there's somebody who is dealing with somebody with NPD, right? And they actually are well researched on it and are looking at it. My immediate thought is always like, all right, does he have NPD though? Because like, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. And like, I've recognized this over the years. People describe these people that they say have NPD, and I'm like, you have described basically lack of empathy and interpersonal exploitativeness. What about this person, other than those two things, is NPD? Otherwise, they're not even a narcissist. They're just kind of a shitty person. And I do think that's the big theme that I see, is the only real traits that kind of align with NPD that I see in people complaining about NPD are, again, lack of empathy, which I don't think... people just kind of equate lack of empathy to just being a dick, which I think are very distinct things, or impairments in empathy. And then interpersonal exploitativeness, which, that one, fair enough. But that doesn't make somebody NPD, right? Means they have two of the, and like also those things have to be all pervasive, right? This has to be in every area of their life. If it's only in one specific instance, then that's not NPD. And people tend to forget that a lot, or if it's only in one area of their life, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very frustrating, just because it's like, how is anybody supposed to convince people that, like, because a lot of people seem to be, oh, I finally have an explanation for the hurt I went through, and it's this mental disorder, which, whatever. If you need that to cope, I get it, so I won't criticize that part of it exactly, but if this person doesn't have NPD, then how am I supposed to tell people, oh yeah, that person actually doesn't have NPD, so your entire structure in terms of, trying to cope with what you experienced is now just gone, right? I can't do that. Like, one, they won't listen to me. Two, even if they did, that'd be kind of shitty, I think. I don't know. But I think that shows the flaws in thinking about trying to tie abusive behaviors to narcissistic personality disorder. Again, I'm a shitty guy. I've done shitty things my entire life. I will never shy away from that. I own it. But how many of those things are due to my NPD, and how many of them are me basically acting in response to my NPD? You know what I mean? The decisions I made were still my own decisions. My NPD wanted me to do certain things or to achieve certain things, and then I made a decision to, in order to fulfill the needs of my NPD, to be shitty. If you're unaware and stuff like that, then it gets a little bit less nuanced than that. But still, at the end of the day, it is the decision to do that. I guess you aren't working with the full picture of information if you're not aware. So there's a little, it's a little more iffy again. So how much of it is the NPD and how much of it is them. But I don't know why, I don't like the idea of blame all of it on NPD. Because why can't we just say there's, shitty people with NPD, shitty people without it? And maybe there's more shitty people with NPD than without it. Or there's a higher proportion of people with NPD who are shitty, I should say. Because I probably would agree with that. I think that a lot of people with NPD inadvertently become shitty, but I think a lot of them inadvertently become good people too. Because, I don't know, if you're smart and have NPD, you kind of realize the best way to secure admiration is through doing nice things. So it's like, it's very unfortunate. It's even more disheartening that clinicians are so undereducated. I remember once I read this article and I was like, how many people are affected by quote unquote pathologicals? And by pathological, she was referring to people with NPD or ASPD and stuff like that. And she just threw random numbers out there. She didn't back them up with anything. She just oh, I think 3 billion of the world's population has been affected by these kinds of people. And I'm like, where the fuck did you get that? Assuming that every single person with ASPD or MPD were the worst people in the world and super shitty, and everyone they came across, they were going to treat shittily. That even then, they account for such a small number of the population, that even then, that seems like a stretch. I guess it could be, with her baseline assumptions, I guess it could be possible. But, and that was a clinician. That was a clinician talking about that shit. And she obviously didn't know what she was talking about. God, tragic. Tragic. It just goes to show, like, nobody knows anything. You know, when I first got my diagnosis, like, it made sense to me. But, like, every time I try to tell somebody afterwards, like, they're all like, oh, there's no way you have NPD, right? Which you know, that was great to hear, right? I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to try to be open and vulnerable with this person about my diagnosis, and it's hard for me to do that for several reasons. And then they're just like, oh, no, fuck you, you don't have it. So, okay, great. And then when you finally convince them, they're always like, then like, when you finally convince them, then they see everything you do through that lens, and it makes a lot more, I think it makes a lot more sense to them afterwards when they start looking for those things. But then again, how much of that is their own confirmation bias? And to this day, nobody has ever called me a narcissist without me telling them first. I mean, hell, people don't even notice my hypersensitivity to criticism, like, unless it's like obvious. Like, I remember once, like, I said something along the lines of, oh, I'm sensitive to somebody, like, as a joke, but like, it was true, because like, when people criticize me, I want to fucking go and die. And she was like, oh, you're not sensitive, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, damn, I'm way better at hiding this shit than I thought. That made me feel kind of good, honestly. And again, but some people are going to be super overt about how hypersensitive they are to criticism. Some people are going to hide it, some people won't. And it's like, yeah, it's just frustrating. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. It was genuinely shocking even for me. Like, I kind of, I had a guess that like most clinicians didn't really, not most, but like a good portion of clinicians didn't know what they were talking about when it came to NPD. I mean, hell, I had my one friend, psychology major, and she only took one abnormal psych class. She ain't gonna be spending too much time researching something that affects 0.5 to 2% of the population when, there's the entire rest of the world. But like, oh man, disheartening sometimes. But yeah, check out Kirk Honda though, he was really cool. I'll link his the beginning of his series in the comments or in the description or whatever. Anyways, I'm taking meds now. I just went on Lamictal. I'm gonna have to make a video on that. I'm not even sure how I'm feeling about it yet. I feel a lot less angry all the time, which is nice. Anyways, y'all have a good day. Take your fucking meds, because apparently that applies to me too now.